This is a creative report with specific focus on projection art and projection mapping design. I have interviewed projection mapper Donny Mossman, new media artist Soyun Park, new media artist Jiwon, and light artist Aka Zhang. How would you define your practice and how has this developed over time?
I would call what I do projection mapping and light art installation. This has developed from originally making simple video loops for stage to accompany live music.
What's your favourite thing about your job and why?
My favourite thing is seeing things glow up and come to life when the projections line up with the object's geometry. A close second is problem solving. There's a lot of problem solving.
How do you support your practice financially and how has this changed over time?
Well, there wasn't much financial support early on, mostly late nights learning and playing around with animating and VJ programs in my spare time. After a while, it was starting to get funded by dance nights at bars. Now it's mostly funded by annual special events, fundraisers for local art programs and private parties.
Do you prefer collaborations or do you prefer to work on your own?
I like collaborating with artists who make the objects I'm mapping, but most of the time they've made the art long before I make a map of it. I have one artist I collaborate with, Gabriel Gaffney Smith, who makes wood relief art with the idea in mind that it will be mapped. I really enjoy working with him and making animations for his pieces. They're particularly satisfying to me.
What advice would you give to a second year design student or what advice would you give to yourself at that age?
I would tell any young artist, don't get discouraged when your early work doesn't produce your desired result. Keep at it and do your work, don't give up. People say do what you love, but you're not going to love every step of the process, and sometimes it will feel like a grind. I think a better way to think about it is to do the thing that lets you get into a flow state and lose time. The thing that you can do and not just be watching the clock waiting for it to be over. Get good at the thing and figure out how to monetize it.
How would you define your practice and how has this developed over time?
I make artworks touching upon a variety of different media, sound and digital discourses, and also design commercially on the way. I have a background of fine arts, especially printmaking, which is highly analogue. Then I realised only recently, the last couple of years, that I've always been interested in new technology and music. So since then, I'm actively experimenting and implementing them into my practice.
What's your favourite thing about your job and why?
My favourite thing about what I do is the collaborative aspect and interactions. Starting and building a project with fellow creative enthusiasts towards the goal brings a strong sense of community and belonging. And the most important part of my practice, I think, is not only for my story, but for the larger public to share and bring the discourses together. When it's finally executed, meeting, hearing, and sharing with the public make me feel so alive.
How do you support your practice financially and how has this changed over time?
I do design commissions and my team often apply for funding from the government and different groups when it's for artistic research. I also write articles every week for a relocation company about life in the Netherlands as a Korean expat. I'm not rich at all, but at a place that I can just sustain myself. When I was in my teens, early 20s, I did a lot of different hospitality works. Bars, cafes, restaurants, call centres, clothing shops, and even in the fridge to stock milk and cheese. Now I'm sustaining myself mostly with my income related to my practice.
Do you prefer to collaborate or work on your own?
I prefer working with people from different disciplinaries. I mostly work with musicians, composers, programmers, creative coders, and 3D designers. Involving experts from these fields significantly enhances the quality of the project and brings so much insightful inspiration. I like to work on my own for the actual production after concepts get developed, therefore prefer dividing practical tasks in the team in that case.
What advice would you give to a second year design student or what advice would you give to yourself at that age?
I don't know if I'm in the position that I can give advice, but I will try from my perspective. I would like to say is the limit that you can do as a second year graphic design student is only what you can imagine. When I was in my early 20s, I didn't know I could already work in the professional field. People around me treated me only as a student. I didn't have much confidence to go out and actually work for commissions and larger projects. If you have passion and ambition, please don't forget you have abilities to carry it on and make it possible. Earning money and having different experiences is very, very important, but don't fall into jobs which frustrate you. Go out for social environments and find people who have the same ambition. It will help you a lot to grow and even bring interesting jobs for you.
Cool. Okay. How would you define your practice and how has this developed over time?
I could define my practice as a mixture of experience. My work generally starts with life experience, and based on that, I put a storyline in graphic and make installations with what I've learned, like fine art, metalcraft, and fashion design. It starts with just like put all together of my experiences, but now I seriously, sincerely pursue borderless artwork with a belief in the synergy of diversity.
What's your favourite thing about your job and why?
The most favourite thing in my job is I could have communication by my artwork. As you know, there are tons of ways to communicate, but only art could give emotion, stories, messages, histories, culture, and thoughts without language. In my opinion, not like learning languages, we do not need to understand what specific materials that the artist used in the art. But just by seeing and experiencing the art, we could mutually communicate without saying a word, and that is the most amazing part, I could say.
How do you support your practice financially and how has that changed over time?
At first, I got a full-time job in the fashion industry. After I saved some money, I started my artwork in earnest, but after a year, I had to get a job because I just spent everything from my savings. So I started to have a part-time job as an English teacher, and because that job makes much more money in an hour compared with another part-time job in my abilities. However, after official debut, I could say my artwork and exhibitions now solves most of my financial problems, but I still have a part-time job just in case.
Do you prefer to collaborate or do you prefer to work on your own?
As I told you, my belief is in the synergy of diversity, so I love to have collaborations with many museums, artists, companies, or festivals. Each one of those has different enjoyment, and through that I learn a new thing and it gives me a new inspiration. At the same time, I love to work on my own. I like to learn or find new materials or technical ways to upgrade or give more depth and abundant artwork or exhibitions, so I try to do those in alternately.
What advice would you give to a second year graphic design student or what advice would you give to yourself at that age?
I know there must be certain projects that you do not want to learn or even do, and you do not know the reasons for learning, but just in my experience, everything helped in any way, and many experiences give many opportunities in unexpected places. I majored in fine art and I transferred to metalcraft after I got a job in fashion design. I was so depressed because I thought I was not mastered any of the major that I've learned. I just thought that I wasted my time, but because of those experiences, I can make my graphic like a fine art. I can make my installations with wood and metals and a good understanding of fabric. And because of those understandings, I had a chance to work with Incheon Airport and 63 Building, which is the signature place in the Republic of Korea. So do not be afraid of experience. You're not wasting your time. At least you learn something from it and apply what you've learned. That movement would give you another lesson and experience.
How would you define your practice and how has this developed over time?
Let me share my creative context with you. Immerse in the structure of light and the light emitted by the structure. Keep experimenting with more mediums of light and structures or ways to generate both of them. Then construct or deconstruct them in many scales of space.
What's your favourite thing about your job and why?
When you create something nice and the serotonin activated in the brain.
How do you support your practice financially and how has that changed over time?
Ideally, people would pay for the work they prefer in the project. The scale of the project may cause the budget, but no matter my light is in a stadium show or even an underground techno scene, I just fully express my sense of beauty, the world view, and the artistic idea.
Do you prefer to collaborate or work on your own?
It depends on the type of project and the ability of myself. When I work in a project that involves the audios, such as an audio-visual installment or a performance, I will collaborate with sound artists. But if it's just a small laser lighting show, I would do it on my own. It usually depends on the scale of the project as well.
What advice would you give to a second year graphic design student or what advice would you give to yourself at that age?
Study much more English and play everything that attracts you and party hard.